All right, so we're going to try to finish up the endocrine system. Quick review of some stuff we've already talked about. We've got one gland to go, and that's the the adrenal gland, rather. But first of all, the ovaries, remember, make two important hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Testes obviously make testosterone. What's the name for any male sex hormone? Androgen. Andro. Remember that. But we want to focus right now on this slide. Just a quick reminder. Remember, day one of the cycle is when the bleeding starts. That happens because the wall of the endometrium starts to slough off. The endometrium is the lining of what? The uterus. And the reason that happens is because hormone levels, particularly the progesterone levels, start to fall. Let's start at the beginning. In the beginning of the cycle, like we said, the endometrium is sloughing off. All four of the major hormone levels are kind of low. Estrogen in blue, progesterone in black, luteinizing hormone or LH in green, and FSH in red. Also, if you look up in the ovary, the follicle, which is the egg and the cells around it, it's really small at this point. As we progress through time, though, going this way, estrogen levels start to rise about day 7 or so, right after the bleeding stops. And that one of the things that estrogen does is it causes this follicle up here to begin to grow. And you can see it swelling up. And it's swelling up where? Where's it located at? Where's the follicle at? Where at in the ovary? Yeah, like on the surface. It's swelling up like a big zit on the surface, essentially. Continue to swell, continue to swell. Estrogen is partly causing that to happen. There's also some FSH in the blood, follicle stimulating hormone. That's making it grow. Around day 14 or so, you get a surge that you see here of FSH. And you also get a surge of what's called LH, luteinizing hormone. Both of those are coming from where? Those two hormones, LH and FSH. Where are they coming from? Nope. What gland are they coming from? They come from the pituitary. And they're telling, one thing they're telling to happen is they're telling this egg to grow, and they're telling ovulation to start. That's what LH tells it to do, ovulate. So the egg bursts out of the sac, heads toward the fallopian tubes in the uterus. But the left behind part of that follicle is called the corpus luteum. And it becomes a hormone-making factory. It stays in the ovary, and it makes lots and lots of hormones. In particular, as you can see up here, it starts to make lots of progesterone. So notice after ovulation, after day 14 of the cycle, this progesterone level very quickly goes up, 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 up. That's because it's coming from here, corpus luteum. And what that progesterone causes to happen is it causes the lining of that endometrium to get thick again. And also, it's hard to tell, I'm sure, from where you're at, but there's little lines running through here. What are those little lines supposed to be? Blood vessels, because it's become vascularized. It's ready for an implanted embryo, essentially. All right, around day 26 or 27 of the cycle, if there hasn't been any implantation, if the egg hasn't got implanted in here, the corpus luteum starts dying, starts degenerating, which means the progesterone levels, as you can see here, start to fall. And if they fall enough, then the cycle starts back over and the endometrium sloughs back off. Now, on the other hand, if implantation does happen, this doesn't happen to the corpus luteum. It stays around, which means it keeps making progesterone levels, which means they stay like that, which means that the lining of the uterus stays like that as well. And so this doesn't happen until after the pregnancy is over. So that's essentially, those are the hormones that are involved in controlling the menstrual reproductive cycle in a woman. All right, the PowerPoint will cooperate. We'll talk about the adrenal gland. Apparently it's just stuck on the cycle here.
Maybe you should put some 10 minutes.
Probably should. All right, anyway, adrenal glands. We did finally get there. Remember, they're found on top of the kidneys. And there's sort of two glands in one. The medulla is the inside part. It makes a certain set of hormones. The cortex, the outside part of the adrenal, it makes a completely different set of hormones. Most of the hormones coming from your adrenal gland are helping deal with stress, physical and or mental or both. Let's talk about the cortex first. Remember, that's the part on the outside. It makes a whole category of hormones called corticosteroids. Now, I'm going to bet that most all of you have taken from the doctor a hormone that would fall into this category, corticosteroids. A lot of asthma treatments have them in there because one of their functions is to lower what? What is your asthma medicine doing?
Lowering inflammation.
Lowering inflammation. One of the things that corticosteroids do is lower inflammation. And we'll get to that in a second. Before we get there, we're first going to talk about a sort of a subcategory of this called mineral corticoids. So these are hormones coming from your adrenal cortex that help to regulate ion concentrations in your body fluids. So in particular, we're going to talk about sodium. But it's a type of hormone that regulates ion concentrations in your blood. And the hormone that we're going to talk about as an example of one of these is aldosterone. Talked about this a little bit, I think, in the last study, so that's sort of where we ended. Aldosterone is about maintaining sodium balance, keeping the right balance of sodium in your body fluids. And it works by telling your kidneys to decrease the amount of sodium that they send out in the urine. So essentially, this hormone, its signal is for you to keep in sodium. Well, if you keep in sodium, what are you also going to keep in? Water, because water always follows the solids, right? Keep in sodium, keep in water, and that can do a couple things. One thing it can do is raise your blood pressure, because more sodium means more water, which means more fluids in your blood vessels, which ultimately means more pressure. So one of the reasons why doctors tell you to control your blood pressure, avoid eating too much salty stuff. Now you can get a condition called aldosteronism. It's when you're making too much aldosterone. And that can cause hypertension, which is the fancy word for what? High blood pressure. It can cause edema, which is the fancy word for swelling, like keeping too much water in, swelling up. And it can cause you to excrete potassium, keeping in the sodium but losing the potassium. And that can be really dangerous because the wrong amount of potassium in your body fluids causes your heart to stop. One of the ways a lot of doctors kill people on purpose, like if they want to murder somebody and not get caught, they'll give them an injection of potassium. And that causes their hearts. Too much potassium, too little potassium can cause serious issues. Anyway. This is if you have too much aldosterone. Yes. No, I haven't said that. I'm not saying that at all. Just saying, you might see that on CSI or some related show. That's all I'm saying. All right, now, another category of hormones made by the cortex are called glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids. So this category of hormones helps to influence your metabolism. And one of the ways it does that is it helps to control your blood sugar levels. Now it helps us to deal with stress. And one of the ways that it helps us to deal with stress is by increasing the amount of glucose in your blood. Why would you want more glucose in your blood if you're under stress? It's that whole fight or flight thing, right? You got to have more glucose to do more what?
Stop running or fighting.
Yeah, backup stuff. Before you can run, you have to do some respiration so you can make ATP, then you can run, then you can fight. Maybe the most famous example of a glucocorticoid is cortisol. So cortisol is an example of a glucocorticoid. And notice its effects on your body. it can promote gluconeogenesis. What does that word mean?
Creation of glucose.
Creation of new glucose. Your body actually makes its own glucose. But the reason you hear about it a lot in medicine is that it has anti-inflammatory effects. This is one of those that gets prescribed, or at least a lab-made version of it will get prescribed for people when they're having inflammation issues. It can also have bad effects on your immune system. And this is one of the reasons why people talk about how stress can be really bad for you. Because when you're stressed, you release a lot of this hormone. And it lowers your immunity to things. It weakens your immune system. It can actually be given to people with organ transplants to lower their rejection rates. It's pretty powerful stuff. An artificial version of this is called prednisone. And it's a corticosteroid, and it's given to people to treat all kinds of inflammation issues. Anybody ever had the croup as a kid? You know, where you had that barking, sounds like a dog barking cough, the croup? I don't know if you have. You get this deep cough, it sounds almost like barking. It's swelling in your throat. And what doctors always prescribe for that is prednisone or something similar, corticosteroid. You might hear people say they're on steroids. Well, they're not on that kind of steroid. They're on steroids to lower swelling in this case. Yeah.
So, if, I don't know, say an athlete was tested for steroids and they were taking prednisone or something, with that,
Two different things.
it doesn't, yeah.
Not
So it only
the
tests
tests are more specific. They're looking for testosterone. They're looking for testosterone or some derivative of it. Yeah.
Okay, so like, if an organ donor had, could they take cortisol? Oh, this is the question. My dad had a kidney transplant, and he can't take anti-inflammatories. So
He cannot take
he
it.
can't.
I don't have a good answer for you there.
I think they can.
Maybe
No.
Gave my dad a kidney.
maybe he's already on something that has a similar effect.
It's a handful.
Maybe it would counteract or double what he already was taking. I don't know. I'd have to know what all he was on first to tell you that. I don't know. Don't know. There's two problems you can have with your adrenal cortex. Actually, more than that, two common ones. Cushing's disease is when you make too much of these type of hormones like cortisol. And they can cause all kinds of bad things to happen. Hyperglycemia, for example. What's that? High blood sugar. They can cause muscle atrophy. What's atrophy mean? Degenerate, waste away. Your muscles start to waste away. They can cause hypertension, high blood pressure, edema or swelling, and two weird things that you may not have heard of before unless you were at the previous study session, moon face and buffalo hump. Don't you wish you had those symptoms?
Don't you?
One study session I did.
Yeah, he's talking about the
I don't remember if it was morning or afternoon. Talk about it in morning. The morning.
Yeah.
So in the moon phase deal, the swelling in your face is so bad that the front part of your face becomes sort of flat but wide. So it looks like a man in the moon kind of thing. You have this wide, flat face. And a buffalo hump, this seems to be way more common in women than in men. I go to church with one woman for sure, and I think another one years back. She had this big hump develop on her back as she got older. It looked almost like she was a hunchback. Wasn't, but it's swelling in the upper part of the back. Buffalo. But that's all caused by too much of hormones like cortisol. Now, on the other hand, you can also have too little of a lot of these hormones, and that's called Addison's disease. And this is the one that's probably most famous because John F. Kennedy had it. Back today, if Barack Obama had something like this, everybody in the United States would know it, right? Because that's the way the media works. But back then, they kind of hid these weaknesses. Like with FDR, nobody ever hardly saw pictures of him in a wheelchair because the media made him look strong. Same kind of thing with JFK. He was a really sick guy. He had to take common injections of adrenal hormones. But nobody knew that because the media kind of kept it secret to some extent. But some symptoms: low blood sodium, really high potassium that can cause heart problems, low glucose levels, so you have really low energy. It can cause really low blood pressure, a lot of vomiting, but it can cause an increased skin pigmentation so that it looks like you have this eternal tan. If you've ever seen pictures of Kennedy, he always looked like he had a really good tan. He looked healthy because of that, but really, he had that tan because he was a pretty sick guy. And he was having problems with his adrenal gland. But again, those are hormones coming from the cortex, the outside part of the adrenal gland. What we want to focus on here at the end, though, maybe, are hormones coming from, actually we're not quite there yet. One more from the cortex. They're also what are called the gonatocorticoids. And again, these are coming from the cortex, the outside part. You ladies have some testosterone, right? But you don't have the normal testosterone making parts. The testosterone that you have comes from your adrenal cortex. So it should only be a small amount. But in women, it should help to cause puberty to start. It's involved in the sex drive. It can also stimulate you to make some estrogen after menopause. So even though it's a very small amount, it's still important in women. Too much of it can cause some weird things to happen in women, like really bad facial hair growth, really deep voice, muscle growth. It'd be like a woman on steroids. Essentially, in this case, you'd just be making your own. But that can't happen. There can be cases where a woman starts to make too much testosterone. All right, but what we want to focus on here at the end are what are called the catecholamines. And those come from the adrenal medulla, the inside part of the adrenal gland, the inner part. The catecholamines are two that we've talked about. Epinephrine, better known as adrenaline to most people, and a related hormone called norepinephrine. Now we know that they help to reinforce and prolong what's called the fight or flight response. Help to prepare you for danger. And as part of that response, they can raise your blood sugar levels. They can speed up your heart rate. They can divert blood to your brain and your heart and your skeletal muscles. And where are they diverting it from? Where would the extra blood that goes to your heart and your brain and your skeletal muscles be coming from if it's diverted from somewhere? What is the fight or flight response sort of temporarily shut down almost? Stuff like digestion pretty much gets shut down temporarily. The blood that's been going to your intestines, stomach, and all those places instead gets into your muscles and your brain and your heart so that you can fight or flight. Now I want to do a little review of the cell signaling stuff as we're going through this. I'm going to put a new slide in this presentation real quick. Not as quick as I'd hoped. Yeah. All right, so let me put a new slide in. And let's go back over how this is supposed to work, the cell signaling process with hormones. So let's say this is a liver cell. This is essentially a review of that essay question on the previous test. We got a liver cell. What's that liver cell storing up inside itself? Glycogen. And I'm going to draw glycogen as a series of X's. where each X represents what? Yeah, this whole thing is glycogen, but each little X would represent a glucose, right? Up here, I'm going to draw this. What would that green thing represent? A G protein receptor. And then this. Yeah, I know. What does that represent, the red thing? The ligand, in this case, which is going to be what? Adrenaline. But it's a ligand. Remember, they have to fit, and hopefully they fit better than my picture indicates. But they have to fit sort of like a lock and a key. And that's step one of cell signaling, right? Reception. And as part of reception, what happens after they get together? Yeah, you get and what's that called? You get a conformational change where this receptor changes shape. Usually it's just inside the membrane. And in this case, this little piece is going to break off. So the signal now has gotten transferred from outside to just inside the membrane. This piece is carrying what with it? What's associated with that alpha subunit? GTP. And that piece is going to move down the membrane, where eventually it's going to come in contact with this guy, which is going to represent what? Adenylyl-cyclase. This piece is going to attach there, and it's going to do what to that enzyme? Activate it by doing what to it? Phosphorylating. It's going to give it energy. And then that adenylyl-cyclase is going to take in what substrate? ATP. I'll be right back. Hey, what's up?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
That's okay. I got it.
Look, the one that's floating.
I mean, you don't have to do anything.
It's in Celsius.
Be great. Be great. Be better. I want you to be better.
All right, guys, back to what I was saying. So our adenylyl-cyclase takes in ATP and it converts it into what? CAMP. Essentially, it just takes off two what? Two phosphates, makes it into a circle. Not circus, circle. And it doesn't just do that once; it does that lots of times. And that's where one of the places where what's going on. Amplification. Those CAMPs are going to go out and activate what? Some kind of protein kinase. Which is then, each one of those is then going to go out and do what? Turn on some different protein kinase. Which is going to turn on some different one, some different one, some different one. And we call that what? Phosphorylation cascade. What else might we call it? Signal transduction pathway. We might just say transduction. Okay? Any of those work. But that's step 2 of the signaling process, of cell signaling process, transduction. Where one protein turns on another and another and another, sort of like a Rube Goldberg machine, until eventually we turn on whatever we're trying to actually make happen at the end. We'll come back to that. What's the term for CAMP? Secondary messenger. Its job is to take the message from just inside the membrane and do what with it? Spread it throughout the cell. Turning on the response. And in this case, what we're trying to turn on is what at the very end? What are we trying to activate at the end? Not a gene, an enzyme that will let's say this is the enzyme here. It's a specific enzyme that will go in, attack this glycogen, and essentially break it into pieces, right? What kind of pieces? Glucose pieces. It's going to break these bonds, and that's going to release glucose into the blood, which is going to give you more energy for what? Fighting or flight. And that's step 3 of this process, response. Being creative by use of verbs. And remember, the responses could be lots of different things. They could be turning on an enzyme, like we did here. Turning off an enzyme. Turning on a gene, turning off a gene, turning on a chemical reaction, turning off a chemical reaction. But all those are ways to do cell signaling, and that's just sort of a good, the adrenaline is sort of a good example of talking about it. No, not quite, we're going to go back and review one more thing before we go. So we've been through all the glands that we're going to talk about. Let me, before I go any further, mention these two because they don't get talked about a lot, and I've just sort of briefly brushed over them. And I will briefly brush over them again here. Remember, the pineal gland is sort of in the middle back part of your brain. A little bitty area. It's the roof of the third ventricle. By the way, what's a ventricle in your brain?
Like a section. Vein.
What's a ventricle in your heart? It's a chamber. There are chambers in your brain that are essentially just filled with fluid. Holes, essentially. Fluid-filled holes. Why would you want spaces in your brain that are just fluid-filled spaces, no brain there? Yeah, if you get your head in it, it's like a cushion. It's like an airbag for your brain, essentially. That's pretty important. So this pineal gland is near one of those. So the roof of one of them. Remember, it makes this chemical called melatonin, which is not really related all that much to what? It's not related. What this sounds kind of like. Melanin, which is what? Skin pigment protein. Skin pigment protein. This is not skin pigment protein. This chemical helps to control your circadian rhythms. It's like your biological clock. When you're awake, when you're tired, when you're hungry, when you're not, when you're active, when you're not. It's a big part of your biological clock. And then the thymus gland is just underneath your sternum. Oh, go ahead. I don't know that, like, you can buy melatonin in the pharmacy. Taking it by mouth, I'm not a, there's all kinds of vitamins and minerals. It's sort of like going to a witch doctor. I don't know that I buy how much it works. Because a lot of times when you take those kinds of things by mouth, they're proteins, right? What happens when it hits your stomach? They denature. So what you put in, does it make it into your blood? Most of it doesn't. So how effective that would be, taking it by mouth, I don't know. Yeah, you can buy it. Yeah, there's all kinds of claims about how effective it will be. My guess is it's probably not nearly as effective as they claim. You get the placebo effect, maybe. Yeah. The thymus gland is another one we just mentioned, just under your sternum. What's your sternum? Chest bone, right? Breastbone. And remember that this is the one I've compared several times to the dojo for your immune system. Its job is where your T cells, helper T cells, killer T cells, all those cells mature and figure out how to fight germs. happens in your thymus gland. And remember that as you get older, those cells or that gland just diminishes. It shrivels up and essentially almost goes away by the time you get pretty old, because your immune system has been trained by that point. You don't need it. The other thing that I will go back and look at real quick is just the diagram. Well, let me talk about the pancreas for a second while we're here. Know that diagram. Know how to explain that diagram. In one way or another, that's going to show up on the test. Because for some reason or other, this is the example hormones that the AP people always like to ask questions about. Glucose controlling hormones. They are common. There's problems with them all the time. But remember, insulin is made by the pancreas when what's going on? When your blood sugar is too high. Blood glucose is too high. Insulin's job is to lower it back down. And insulin is sending a message. Remember, that's all hormones are, messages. Sending a message to the liver, the muscles, saying take glucose out of the blood, stick it together, and make what? Glycogen. Or it's telling the adipose, the fat cells, to take that glucose in and make fat out of it. That's lowering your blood sugar back to normal. On the other hand, if it's been a long time since you've eaten and your blood sugar levels are dropping, your pancreas releases glucagon. And it has the opposite, or the antagonistic action. It's telling the liver, take that glycogen that you've been storing, now's the time we need it, break it up, put glucose back in the blood, get my glucose levels back to where they need to be. Or it can tell the fat to take some of that fat and use that fat to make more glucose, raising you back up. Those are antagonistic hormones, always helping you stay near what? Set homeostasis. That was a goiter. That's what happens when you don't have enough what? Iodine in your diet and your thyroid gland swells up. I don't know what a complex goiter. Maybe it's more than one lump. I don't know. Probably surgically would be my guess.
Do we go away if you ate salt?
I don't know.
Just eat a bunch of salt.
Don't do this now. There will also be some type of question on your test about negative feedback. Make sure you can describe negative feedback. And this picture would be a really good picture to be able to use. Think back that your hypothalamus is sort of like the overseer of the endocrine system. It's your homeostatic center. It's monitoring all kinds of stuff. Let's say that you need to speed up your metabolism. Your metabolic rate's too low. Maybe your body temperature is dropping. One way you can raise your body temperature is by speeding up metabolism, right? So what gland does the hypothalamus need to tell to get off its lazy rear and get to work? Well, at the end of the chain. Who's the one that's controlling your metabolic rate? Which gland? Thyroid. The thyroid. So here's the thing. The target gland in my analogy here is going to be the thyroid. But to make the thyroid do what it's supposed to do, the hypothalamus is going to send out essentially an order called the releasing hormone. And that's going to tell the pituitary, hey, I've got a problem. I need to raise my metabolism. Body temperature is too cold. Let's raise that metabolism. That order goes out to the pituitary, which is just below the hypothalamus. Pituitary says, yes, sir. I can take care of that. It sends out its own order called the stimulating hormone, which goes to the thyroid and essentially tells the thyroid to go to work. Once the thyroid goes to work, it's going to start making its hormone, which in this case is called thyroid hormone. And thyroid hormone will go out into the blood, and it's going to travel to what cells? Pretty much all cells, because all cells do cell respiration. It's going to tell them to speed it up. As all this is going on, though, there's the feedback part of this is that the hypothalamus is measuring the levels of thyroid hormone in your blood. So is the pituitary. And when those levels get to where they need to be, the hypothalamus says, okay, I can stop yelling at the pituitary, so it stops giving off that order. The pituitary, when the levels get okay, it says, okay, I can stop yelling at the thyroid. And therefore, the thyroid stops doing what? Yelling at all the other cells, which is what it's been doing, right? So it stops making that. And that's why it's called what kind of feedback? Negative feedback. The other thing to make sure you can do is label a diagram and know what these organs do. The ones that are hard to tell apart are the hypothalamus and the pituitary. They're both sort of front, middle part of your brain, both very tiny areas. But the pituitary one is lower down and looks sort of like what? A peanut. Hypothalamus is just an area right above it. The pineal is more toward the back part of your brain. What's the word for back? Back is posterior. On down around your Adam's apple is your thyroid gland. Makes a couple of hormones. The main one is thyroid hormone, and it's about controlling metabolic rate. What's the other hormone made by the thyroid do? It's called calcitonin. And it helps to regulate the levels of calcium and phosphate ions in your blood and body fluids. A little bit further down to the thymus, around your sternum, that's the one where your T cells mature. It's the dojo. Going on down, you got your adrenal glands on top of each kidney. Remember, they make stress hormones. And hormones that help to control levels of things like sodium and potassium. They also may help to regulate blood sugar and inflammation. A little bit further down, right underneath your stomach, there's your pancreas. It's sort of shaped like an L. And remember, it makes glucagon. It helps to do what? Glucagon does what to blood sugar? Raises it. And insulin helps to lower it. They're antagonistic pair of hormones. And then you've got your ovaries or your testes, hopefully not both. That would be weird. Sorry, I didn't mean to think. Anyway, remember, the ovaries make estrogen or progesterone, and the testes make androgens, which are the male hormones. And that's where I will stop before I say more and get in trouble.
What?
You're on recording.
Yeah, I know. I can edit it out, though.
Edit it out.